Hi, everybody. Thank you for watching our online lecture on banana disease in bananas and its effect on countries and people that depend on the banana trade. I am Meine Boer, and this lecture is organized by SIP Utrecht, the Student Association for International Relations in Utrecht. We organize an intellectual activity every Tuesday, and due to the circumstances surrounding the coronavirus, these activities are currently online. Tonight we will have two lectures by Gert Kema, phytopathologist at the Wageningen University.
Hi.
And Luud Clercx, project manager at Agrover, a fair trade tropical fruit company.
Good evening, everyone.
We will explain the socio-economical side. Afterwards, there will be time for discussion and questions. So do not hesitate to ask your questions in the chat on Facebook and YouTube. And one final matter before I give the word to Professor Kema is that I would like to point out that afterwards we would like your feedback, the link for which can be found in the description. Now, without further ado, I would like to give the word to Professor Kema.
Okay, thanks. So I'll share my screen with you and then we kick it off. Good. So I hope you all can see this. And just get my laser pointer. Good. Ready to go. So I'm looking at you, Mine. Everything seems all right? Okay, great, good. Well, good evening, everybody. So it's a pleasure for me to talk for your association. Thank you very much for the invitation. And so the title that was given to me was Panama Disease in Bananas, the Consequences for Major Banana Exporting Countries. So I'm happy to introduce to you this important problem in international agriculture. So irrespective whether it concerns large growers, but also millions of smallholders. And first of all, I'd like to take you back for let's say 70 to 100 years. And what you see in this photograph is an inundation treatment to actually sterilize soils that are infested with the fungus that is causing fusarium wilt. So fusarium wilt was really hitting Central America in the previous century. And that was due to the fact that they grew a cultivar that's called Gros Michel that was very susceptible to fungi that caused fusarium wilt. And one of the treatments was inundation. So you essentially make the soil anaerobic, so there's no oxygen in the soil, and that of course suffocates every organism that depends on oxygens, including fungi, but also many other organisms. So the only ones that survive are the anaerobic bacteria. And then after such a treatment that lasted for at least weeks, but sometimes a month, these areas were then replanted with that same cultivar Gros Michel, as you can see here. So this is exactly the same plot. But in these years, you have to keep in mind that plant production was mostly by suckers. And bananas are seedless plants, because that's why we eat them. A wild banana is full of seeds, so edible bananas don't have seeds, and they make new shoots all the time. So it's a vegetative reproduction system. So you cut off those shoots, grow those plants, and then replant. And that's what you see here. But of course, since this soil was treated, so many, for instance, antagonistic fungi were also killed. And on top of that, many of these plants that were transplanted here were already infected again by fusarium, but it just takes months before you see the symptom. So these plants were then planted in sterilized soils, and that eventually really boomed the epidemic. And so that's why it really swept across Latin America, and the only way to eventually deal with it was to start new areas up to a level that at one point of time, Guatemala, for instance, was about for 50% owned by one of the major banana companies. And of course, that also caused a major societal unrest. And that's why also some of these countries are since then called banana republics. So it has a lot to do with the production of bananas in that area. So what you have to keep in mind from this slide is that the disease is called Fusarium wilt. It is caused by a plethora of Fusarium fungi, different species, but the species that in fact grows Michel are collectively called race 1 strains. Just keep that in mind. Now, the reason why I give you this flashback in history is that eventually, after many, many different attempts to control this disease, there was a variety identified. It was not bred. It is actually a clone found in Southeast Asia. That's the current Cavendish bananas. Those are the bananas that we eat. If you eat bananas, you go to the supermarket, you may see the different brands, but just keep in mind it's one and the same set of genotypes. Very resistant to the race 1 strains, very susceptible to another fungus, and that's why, for instance, here in Urubá in Colombia, these plantations have to be sprayed at least once a week to control that fungus. Now, Fusarium cannot be controlled right now with fungicides, so there is still no way to control Fusarium wilt of banana or Panama disease. That's the same disease. So the fact that Cavendish quenched that epidemic because it is super resistant to the race 1 strains, of course, has resulted in the current situation that about 50% of the global acreage is covered by Cavendish. And if you look at the export trade, more than 95% of the export is dominated by Cavendish varieties all around the world. That, of course, is a classic example of a monoculture which has a huge risk in terms of plant pathology. And that's exactly what was happening. So here you see a slide, a photograph taken in the Philippines, where you see a plantation of Cavendish that is devastated by a new strain of Fusarium that is now very pathogenic on Cavendish. That strain is called Tropical Race 4. So just remember Race 1 and Tropical Race 4. Cavendish, super resistant to Race 1, but very susceptible to Tropical Race 4. And since we have now a monoculture, you can imagine that this very rapidly develops into a pandemic. Everybody understands now what a pandemic is. That's exactly what's ongoing in banana production around the world. Okay, just a few characteristics of this disease. This is the symptom that you see. So the leaves start yellowing, there is extensive chlorosis, eventually they die, and the plant is really starts to wilt. And that's because the fungus is a soil-borne fungus. It penetrates the root system, then it is growing through the vascular system of the plant. So it's a truly vascular disease like we have in humans. So it's also killing because it occludes all the vessels and therefore the plant dies. So as I said, it's caused by a plethora of different Fusarium species, but the disease that is now caused in Cavendish bananas, Fusarium wilt or Panama disease in Cavendish, is caused by this single strain Tropical Race 4. So that's Fusarium species, or these Fusarium species are clonal pathogens. There is no known sexual cycle, and that also means that they reproduce clonally, and this TR4 strain is a clone that is now globally disseminating. Well, if you cut such a plant, this is the cross-section of the stem. Remember, banana is not a tree. Many people call banana a banana tree, but that's not right. It's a monocot plant, so it's a pseudostem. And here you see the discoloration. All these yellow spots here are vascular bundles that are colonized by Fusarium, and here they are completely occluded, okay? So this is the internal symptom that you see. Now, if we zoom into TR4, you already can see that actually it was already observed in the 1960s in Taiwan. So from the 1950s or so, Cavendish really took over. So that wasn't an overnight switch of the industry. It really took time to embrace Cavendish as a replacement for Gros Michel for several reasons. One of the major reasons was that the entire logistic chain had to be tailored to Cavendish. So that's why we now have banana boxes. As students, you all know what a banana box is. Ideal stuff to store things, right? Well, that is really since the introduction of Cavendish, because you have to pamper Cavendish in a box, cool it during transportation, ripen it on the spot, and then bring it to the supermarket. Gros Michel was a sturdy fruit, very thick skin, so you could just throw it in the boat or in the train as a bunch and transport it. Well, with the introduction of Cavendish, that was all over. So that started more or less in the 50s, but then already in the 60s, there was an observation of Fusarium wilt in Cavendish in Taiwan. But of course, as you can remember, as you can probably understand, this is a major production zone, and this was considered to be an Asian problem. Far away, don't worry. Since then, TR4 has jumped into mainland China, continued to disseminate across entire Southeast Asia. And the fear actually started again when we discovered and diagnosed a TR4 strain in Jordan in 2014. We published it, and that was actually the first, let's say, shock in the industry. So, wait a second, this is not anymore an Asian issue. It's coming our way. And then very soon afterwards, it was discovered in Yemen. It popped up in Africa, the first introduction in Africa. Later on here, also here in Mayotte in 2019. So this really shocked also the industry, but particularly also many smallholders, because banana is not just a fruit that we eat, it's a staple food in East Africa, as important as rice in Asia and maize across other areas in Africa. And so this is the basis of the matoke dish, which is a cooking banana. So TR4 is truly threatening food security in this entire region. Well, to make a long story short, eventually it also jumped into Latin America. And what I have to underscore here, these international jumps is not by natural means. It's a soil-borne fungus. Of course, it disseminates with flooding, but it's mostly local or regional. But those international and intercontinental jumps is all, driven by people. So you either take infected plants along, you smuggle them into a country, or you don't clear your boots or your machinery. And what you have to keep in mind as well is there is a lot of traffic of banana workers from Central America to Southeast Asia and the other way around. So there's a lot of mobility. And of course, that mobility is a problem for the dissemination of diseases, also of plant diseases. All the green dots are the locations where we have identified TR4 and where we diagnosed it with a molecular diagnostic. That's what you see here. Very similar to things we are currently being developed for the coronavirus and all kinds of other diseases. So you target a particular part in the DNA of the fungus, and you have to keep in mind that beforehand it took several months to diagnose whether a plant was infected with TR4. With this diagnostic, you know it within 1 day. And of course, that gives you a handle on managing the disease. But soil-borne disease is a very difficult issue in terms of disease control. So this was the first generation of diagnostic. We published that in 2010. It was a PCR. Last year, we developed a lamp. Well, you may have seen also that lamp diagnostics are being developed for the coronavirus. Very similar technology. This is a handheld device, and you have the result within about 30 minutes. Eventually, of course, we would like to go to this type of diagnostics where you actually, this is a lateral flow device where you have the result of a test within 15 minutes. Of course, that takes time. And what is important for you to keep in mind is if you look at this cartoon. So this is the DNA, the genome of this TR4 fungus, Fusarium odoratissimum. It has 12 chromosomes. The first target of the 2010 diagnostic was here on chromosome 4, and the second target for the lamp is on chromosome 11. So you have a double check here. If it's positive for diagnostic 1, it should be positive for diagnostic 2. So that makes it very solid. And we use that, for instance, to validate and to test the introduction of TR4 in Colombia. And Colombia was the first entrance in Latin America. Of course, there is a history there of Fusarium wilt, and that is threatening really a major area, not only of export trade, but also of many, many smallholders that either grow Cavendish for the international trade, but also grow local varieties like plantain. And plantain is a very important basic ingredient of the dishes in Central America. Well, I'm not going to all these details. What I just would like you to show is if you look in this in this plot here, you see the colored strains here is 3 strains from Colombia. So this is all based on genome sequences. So this is a phylogeny, as we call it. So here you see the species that collectively is Fusarium odoratissimum. And if you compare down these strains, you have a strain from Taiwan, Vietnam, Laos, Myanmar, Colombia, Pakistan, Indonesia. You see, when you sequence them, they're all equal. So of course there are point mutations in a genome. We call those single nucleotide polymorphisms. That's also if you compare 2 twins, you know, they look identical, but of course, if you sequence the genome, you will find mutations. That's also what you see here, but there is very clearly, this is just one and the same species that disseminates around the world. So what we then did is we started sampling in the heart of banana diversity, the gene center of banana in Southeast Asia, with a very focal point in Indonesia. So one of my PhD students, Nani Mariani, she traveled across Indonesia to sample. So we sampled about 200 isolates, and about 100 of those isolates are TR4, from the tip of Sumatra and Aceh to the very eastern part here in Papua. The reason is that we believe that the transmigration policy started by the Dutch about 150 years ago only stopped in 2015 by the current president. So many people from Java were translocated to other regions, took their own banana plants with them, they were infected, and of course we in that way also disseminate the disease in Indonesia. So here you have all those different species of Fusarium that collectively are race 1 strains. And Fusarium odoratissimum is really different from all those others, as you can see here. So here, this gray rectangle here are the 7 species, or the 6 here, but we have 7 species that actually are collectively race 1 strains. Another PhD student, Nadia Ordonez from Ecuador, she took a global perspective. So she started sampling around the world, and we made a phylogeny to really capture the global genetic diversity of the fungi that cause Fusarium wilt. And you can plot it in this type of graph. So the details are not important. What I simply would like to show you is the blue part here are the race 1 strains. And I showed you in the previous slides that we have 6 to 7 species. And that's also what you see in this graph. So this clade is really significantly different from this one and from this one and from this one. Whereas if you look to TR4, you see this is essentially one flat line of about 150 isolates, and they're all the same. There is some variation here, so this is the same species, but it is genetically slightly different. And so this is the clone of TR4, and here you have the diversity of race 1. Okay, so we used those differences also to do a kind of a forensic study. So we sampled here in southern China, but also on the occurrence of TR4 in Myanmar, Laos, and Vietnam. And here you again see such a sequencing plot. So here you see those strains. We sequenced them, they're all the same. And what we found out is you look here in this principal component analysis, you see here China, and you see that in the same angle here you have Myanmar, Vietnam, and Laos, which essentially indicates that the strains occurring in Myanmar, Laos, and Vietnam are there moved from China into these regions. And there's a very logical explanation. Because of the TR4 pressure here in southern China and Yunnan, growers that can afford it start plantations in those other countries in the Mekong Delta, start growing, bring their own machines, bring their own personnel, and of course they traffic also the fungus along with them. And so you really see that is dragging the disease to those new areas. And in a way, it is an unstoppable process because it really requires a very strict quarantine, which is very difficult to implement, particularly for a soil-borne disease. Now, if you go back into history again, if you look at the gene center of banana, that's of course also the gene center of fungi that evolve along with banana, with migrating of banana to new areas. Many of those plants were infected, and in that way, eventually, the disease was all, or the fungus was also disseminated across those regions. And that's what we now try to capture better by that genetic diversity plots that I showed you in the previous slide. Okay, the question is, of course, what next? And I already told you about the gene center. The gene center has a tremendous wide genetic diversity of bananas. So we only grow a very small portion of the genetic diversity that's available. And all this genetic diversity is essentially undeployed. It's there, but it's not used in breeding programs to improve banana. And of course that has to change, and that is why we started a spin-off company that's called Yellowway, where from the Netherlands we start breeding bananas. And why we try to capture that genetic diversity that is present in wild germplasm. That's done in many, many other crops, but banana is lagging behind already for several decades. So this is the company. And one of the things we did, for instance, with one of my PhD students, is to travel across Sumatra here in Indonesia to describe the genetic diversity of wild banana germplasm. So here the orange dots are all locations. All those plants were sampled. They were genotyped to capture genetic diversity. And in that way, we found a species that is resistant to tropical race 4. And here you see again, for you just to keep in mind, the race 1 strains I talked about. This is Cavendish, super resistant to race 1. So this is a cross section through the stem of an infected plant. If you look at Gros Michel, you see this dark coloration, discoloration, which really shows this fungus is capable to kill Gros Michel, comes through the root in the corm, and then goes into the vascular system. Gros Michel is equally susceptible to TR4. And you see Cavendish very resistant to race 1, but super susceptible to TR4. Now, what you really would like to understand, of course, what is the genetic basis of this resistance? And despite the fact that Cavendish saved the industry, that was still unknown until we started to do genetic studies. And to make a long story short, we selved a wild, so self-fertilization, a wild banana clone, looked at the segregated population, genotyped it. So we looked at each and every plant, what the genotype was, and then you phenotype it. So you do this type of tests. Phenotyping means simply you inoculate a plant and see whether it is susceptible or resistant. And when you put those two data sets on top of each other, you essentially can map genes that are involved in that resistance across the genome of the banana plant. And here you see that we find a set of genes, or a gene on chromosome 10, on the distal part of chromosome 10, so one of the end parts of the chromosome. And here you see a very high value, which is indicating there is a crucial gene for resistance that is responsible for this resistance here. Now, once you have such a gene, you have a marker, and then you can abandon all the phenotyping. You don't have to test in the field anymore. You don't have to test in the greenhouse anymore. The only thing you do is you extract DNA, you check whether the plant has the marker, yes or no. If it has the marker, it's resistant. This is just a laboratory exercise. So you can abandon very time-consuming, very expensive trials to determine whether plants are resistant or susceptible. So along with that, we also started initiatives to really innovate the production of bananas and to monitor productivity in fields by aerial monitoring. And we also started to invent methods to innovate the production system. And now plantations are standing in the field for 15, 20 years or longer. What we did in the Netherlands is we started growing bananas on substrate. Like tomatoes in the Netherlands, in Westland, all those tomatoes are grown on substrate, rock wool or other substrate. You just get the water and nutrition, and that does a job. So we did the same for banana. You can see that in this movie. There it goes. I hope you can see it. Just takes about 2 minutes, gives you an impression. Okay, and right now we have expanded this initiative into a dedicated greenhouse in the World Food Center location in Ede, where we build a dedicated greenhouse where we grow bananas on substrate. And this is actually for us an innovation hub. So we try to perfect the system there. And now we are preparing trials in Guatemala and the Philippines where we grow bananas on substrate. So you can do a lot of genetic research to improve banana. And of course we do that. But the results of such research programs is only there in, 10 years from now. Banana breeding is a slow process. So new varieties will not enter the market in about 10 years from now, not earlier, maybe a little bit earlier. But that doesn't help growers that now suffer from Fusarium wilt. So here in Guatemala, TR4 is not yet there, but here in the Philippines, it is endemic, it's everywhere. And of course, next to trying to improve the crop, we also can innovate the cultivation system. And since it's a soil-borne pathogen, the Fusarium wilt, the Fusaria that cause Fusarium wilt, but along with that, there are many other soil-borne problems. For instance, nematodes, little worms that eat the roots. It's a big problem. Bacterial diseases like Moko disease. Well, one pragmatic way to escape from those problems is just lift the crop from the soil and start growing it in substrate. So you don't have bacteria anymore, you don't have Fusarium wilt anymore, you can optimize water, you can optimize nutrition. So that's what we are currently testing in Guatemala. Of course, we have to make sure that we reach the same or a better productivity, the same or a better quality. And what you do also is you make actually a cultivation system that lasts for years. You turn that into an annual crop. With an annual crop, I mean is you can flip cultivars by year. Once you have produced the crop, 9 months after you have planted it, you have harvest, you can just abandon that crop and put another variety in that substrate and have another variety produced. So this makes the cultivation system way more dynamic. So you start shaking the monoculture. And like here in Western Europe, we have crop rotation, right? So you have a plot 1 year, year one, you planted to wheat. The second year, you planted to potatoes. The third year, you planted to sugar beets. And the fourth year, you planted to onions, for instance. In banana, that's impossible. The infrastructure is so cost intensive that you cannot say, okay, I grow 1 year banana and the next year I grow sugarcane. That is virtually impossible. Whereas if you grow it on substrate, you actually introduce that dynamics. So I think this is a very important development. Well, this finishes my talk. I really would like to thank all the institutions and companies with whom we collaborate and that have sponsored our research. I really would like to thank my team in Wageningen and in other parts of the world where we collectively try to address the Fusarium wilt problem in bananas. Of course, I would like to thank my department at Wageningen University, and I thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you very much. Very nice talk. Then I think we now have an understanding of what the problem is, and we can continue with the lecture of Luud Clercx.
Sorry. Yeah, I was muted still. Thank you very much, Heine. I will talk a bit about the socioeconomic implications of the Panama disease. Let's see if it works. Okay. First of all, a bit, who are we? We are Agrofair. We were founded in '96 by the Dutch NGO Solidariat with the explicit goal to introduce the fair trade concept in the banana sector. We work mostly with smallholders, but also with family businesses. And the small farmers at this moment are co-owners of Agrofair. They have 41% of the shares and also a seat and a supervisory board. Yeah, we import bananas from Peru, Ecuador, Panama, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Dominican Republic, and distributed all over Europe, but not in the Netherlands. That has also always been a trauma that we never managed to get into the Dutch supermarket. That's another story. Yeah, we are growing bit by bit. The turnover in last year was 85 million. About 100 containers bananas arrive in our store in Barendrecht per week. Yeah, we are a medium-sized company, a small banana company, 25 staff in Barendrecht and 14 in Latin America. Okay, if we look at the implications of the banana disease, we have to take a look at the global sector, global banana and plantain sector. Yeah, and we know that the past 60 years, the banana production, only banana, I'm not talking even about of plantains, but the banana productions tripled over the past 60 years. In terms of harvested area, there's a growth from 2 million hectares to almost 6 million hectares at this moment. Also, the banana exports, they went up fivefold, even bigger. So in the 1960s, there was about 5 million tons that were exported, and nowadays it's above 25 million tons. If we see here the areas in production worldwide, we see a difference in the different continents. Gert Kema already talked a bit about this. So we see in Africa, huge area planted with plantains, and also big area in bananas. In the Americas, it's more or less the same, plantains and bananas. And we see also a huge area planted in bananas in Asia. Well, Europe, it's too small to show it, but it's also bananas grown in Europe. We're talking about the French overseas islands in Guadeloupe, Martinique, also the Canary Islands, of course. And yeah, there's of course in the Pacific Ocean, a lot of islands, they also grow bananas. So this is the production worldwide, some data from the site of FAO. So the total production of plantains is almost 40 million tons, and the total production of banana is about 150 million tons, more than 155 million tons. This is incredible volume of banana and plantains worldwide. And you see a bit the difference. African plantains, Africa banana, American plantains, American bananas, Asia plantain, and a huge quantity of volume of bananas, mainly produced in India and China. Those are the biggest banana producers in the world, but also, of course, Taiwan, Indonesia, they're very densely populated and eat a lot of bananas. And Asia, as you recall, is the origin of the banana. But it's also important to recall that most of the bananas and plantains are for self-consumption. We said that 25 million tons of bananas are exported, of which 95% bananas. But this only represents 16% of the whole volume of all banana and plantains. So that indicates, 135 million almost is for domestic markets or self-consumption. That is the big majority. So this indicates that, okay, if tomorrow we don't have banana, it's sad, but we have our apples, we have other stuff, pears. But for the majority of people in Africa, Latin America, and Asia, bananas and plantains are very, very important as staple food. So this, and apart from the Cavendish, many other cultivars are susceptible to tropical race 4 and other banana diseases. So really, this brings the food security of millions and millions, hundreds of millions of households into danger. So we focus now a bit on Americas to see the difference. So here we see that Brazil is the biggest banana producer. But we never ate banana from Brazil, but it is the biggest banana producer in Latin America. And that is because, it's a huge country, huge population, 200 million people. So mainly there's a production for the internal market. Almost nothing is exported. Then, yeah, the banana countries that we know, Ecuador, Colombia, Guatemala, Mexico, etc., etc. Then we have, this is the area in banana. Area in plantain. Yeah, we see very important production in Colombia, Peru, Ecuador. These are very important countries where plantain is a main staple food in the daily dish, in the morning, in the afternoon, also for dinner. If you see the export data, the picture is a bit different. Here we see that Ecuador, which has not a big population, but is the biggest exporter of bananas in the world. Here we see the values, the total export value in 2018 was $7 billion. Well, if we see this picture, Ecuador, $3 billion value of export, followed by Costa Rica, more than $1 billion. Guatemala, Colombia, almost $1 billion as well. If we see this, these data, these figures, we have to remind that the banana sectors are not the plantation, not evenly spread over these countries. They're concentrated in certain regions where the climate is good, where there's good soil, and also they're close to the ports, to the export ports. So what we see, for example, in Ecuador, it's mostly on the Pacific coast, along, from the north to the south. In Costa Rica, it's concentrated in the Atlantic zone, and especially the South Atlantic zone. In Guatemala, it's one district in the east and one district in the west coast. In Colombia, I have two districts, one Magdalena nearby Santa Marta and Urabá. That's also mentioned in the United States of America, but it is a re-export. Honduras, the same. Peru have the north of Peru. Panama, also two districts. Dominican Republic, a few provinces in the west, well, and so on, so on. So that means that the local economies in these territories, in these provinces, they really float on the banana sector. Really thousands, hundreds of thousands of people are working in the banana sector. They're linked to the local villages, the local economy each week, because it is a weekly, each week or now and then, several times a week, there are shipments. Monthly salaries are paid. So each month, millions and millions of dollars are pumped into the local economy, local shops, etc. Imagine what will happen, if the tropical rainforest destroys these banana economies. Not only destroying the banana economies, but also local economies who float, who depend largely on the banana sector. If we think of banana for export, we think of big plantation, but that is a thing of the past. Nowadays, the big 4 or 5, like Del Monte, Chiquita, Fives, and Dole, they source half of the banana, more or less, from their own plantations. The other half of their banana they source from independent producers. And that can be medium-sized family farms, family companies, but also there's a lot, thousands and thousands of small farmers, not organized or organized in associations or cooperatives. So there's many small farmers, not only for the involved in production of plantain and banana for the domestic market, but also for the export markets. And we as Agrify are an example of it, because this is our produce base. Now, bananas are not only important in the banana countries, but also in the trade. Bananas and plantains are cultivated in 135 tropical and subtropical countries. It's worldwide the 8th most important foodstuff, and in developing countries, as average, the 4th most important foodstuff. In East Africa, even the most important foodstuff. The annual imports in Europe are nowadays 12 million tons for 742 million people. On average, it means 15 kilos per person per day. That's on average. So there's a baby, kids, old people, adults, etc. 15 kilos per person per day. So a banana is the most traded fruit in the world, even more than apples, oranges, etc. And bananas in Europe are in the top 3 or top 5 of the most sold products in most supermarkets. Almost every family buys a bit of bananas each week. If you talk about employment in Latin America, yeah, there's a kind of parameter that says, okay, there's about 1 or 2 persons per hectare needed for banana production in the export sector. So multiply by 2 million hectares, that means about 4 million persons. There's also a lot of indirect employment, so people that do not work directly on the plantations or in the packing stations, but for example in transport, in the input, the provision of inputs, etc., etc. So there's another 4 or 5 million persons who depend indirectly on the banana sector. If we see in Latin America that still the families are quite big, so 5-6 persons, dependent persons on each family. So that means that the livelihoods of about 30 or 40 million people depend on the banana sector, and that is even without taking into account the embeddedness of the banana sector in the local economies, because also local economies, as we showed, also depend on the banana sector. They float on the banana economies in different territories. Okay, now TR4, what is it going to do with Latin America? Here we see the spread of the TR4. Gert already told something about that. So a big shock. Sooner or later, people thought, well, it's going to show up in Latin America. And last year, this was the case. It was an enormous shock for the whole banana sector, because it's in the heart of the banana region. So as in Asia, TR4 will spread further in the Americas. So it took about 20 years, 25 years before the TR4 spread to the whole Southeast Asia, to India, it jumped to Pakistan, etc. But where and at what speed? Which country will be next? What are the risks? So we should talk a bit more about this. So there's a kind of equation that says risk is the vulnerability that adds to risk, and less resilience, minus resilience, because that reduces the risk. So the risk in this case is that the tropical race 4 disease will spread further. And so we have to analyze what's the vulnerabilities of the sector, and how what can be the response to cope with these risks. So it's not automatically that you have to lean back and wait if things happen. No, there's a kind of response that you can give to cope with this vulnerability. So first, we start with a plant. Gert already talked a bit about that. So the narrow genetic base makes the sector extremely vulnerable to several diseases, Fusarium tropical race 4, but also black stickatoka. This is a fungal disease of the leaves, but you can control it by spraying. But the Fusarium is in the soil, so it's very difficult to control that. It's all monoculture. The top 10 banana countries is 65%, and the export sector 95 or even more percent Cavendish. So there's little biodiversity in the plantations. Most of it is monoculture, especially on plantations for export. There's also little biodiversity in the soils, aggravated even by the application of agrochemicals, herbicides, nematicides, insecticides, fungicides that kill a lot of soil life. Little biodiversity above the soil is also little biodiversity beneath the soil, but because I learned that every plant brings with it its own community of thousands of microorganisms. There's still no really resistant varieties available. The scientists are working on it, but they're not ready available for the majority of the banana producers. What also adds to the risk is ignorance. although in Latin America, many people, banana producers, especially for the export, have heard about TR4. But another thing is to know, okay, what to do if TR4 is detected or the plant has symptoms, what to do. So many people who need to be informed are not. So I'm talking about workers, farm managers, foremen, farm visitors, government officials, all kinds of service providers who visit the banana plantations, etc. And not to speak of small farmers who are far away in the mountains producing for the domestic market or plantains, who are also at risk, but also a risk factor for the export sector, because they can also spread tropical race 4 disease further. And what you see is often there's a lot of linkages, for example, that small farmers of plantains, they have family or their sons, they work on banana plantations, and the father has a small plantation of plantain, for example. So there are all kinds of linkages between the two sectors. But also adds to the risk is that many governments are not sufficiently prepared. There are no surveillance methods, early warning system in place, or adequate quarantine legislations, with the good exceptions. And the things are moving. So especially the bigger banana countries like Ecuador and Colombia and Costa Rica, they are starting to organize themselves. But there are also weak countries, weak governments, for example, in Peru, Honduras, Nicaragua, who've virtually done nothing. And since it's a regional problem, so the strength of your response is as strong as the weakest part of the chain. So it's really a regional response is needed. And the banana sector is starting to organize, but it takes a lot of time and resources, and it's not evident that they will achieve the level of organization needed. Well, I would like to place this also a bit, this crisis in a wider context, the crisis of the current food systems. So, the past years, several reports were published from the perspective of health, biodiversity, climate, of course, the Green Deal of Europe and others, and the common denominators. So and these are more or less the following: the serious deterioration of the ecosystems, of the biodiversity, water resources, and soil conditions. This is a general threat to the productivity and resilience of food production systems. The current farming systems, with a huge and massive use of external inputs, pesticides, fertilizers, fossil fuels, they contribute to habitat destruction, climate change, and food waste, and are unsustainable. These reports also stress the importance of the nature, biodiversity, and healthy ecosystems for sustainable food production for a growing world population. And they stress also the need for fundamental changes towards more sustainable production and trading systems. And they state bluntly that business as usual is not an option anymore. That is over. That is a thing of the past. So yeah, these things perhaps place what's happening in the banana sector in a wider perspective, because TR4 and Sigatoka, we could consider these as a wake-up call. So the current way of producing banana is not sustainable anymore. So we should fundamentally revise or transform the prevailing banana production and also the trade systems, especially those for export. Well, lately there's a lot of discussion about the so-called food system approach. So not only take into account the production system, but also the enabling environment, policies, environmental drivers, the market, etc. By usually a scheme. This is more or less, I'm not going to read this everything, but that's perhaps for afterwards. This is going to be organized, the UN will organize a summit on food systems in next year. And this is taken from the website, kind of call to participate in this worldwide food summit. Okay, let's zoom a bit in. Okay, this was more or less abstract with a whole lot of data. Let's zoom into what's happening in Peru. Banana production for export takes place in the Chira Valley, about 8,000 hectares. This is an image taken from Google Earth. Here what you see, we will see it later, is the Poechos Dam, Poechos Reservoir for irrigation. It's a very arid country zone. You see this is a kind of oasis. The rest is kind of a desert. It's only 300 millimeters water per year, and that's why organic bananas can be grown in Peru, because you don't have Sigatoka disease. Sigatoka disease is a foliar disease with fungi, and they feel well in humid tropics. In the dry tropics, they cannot survive. So that is why organic bananas that we eat, and we find it in the shops, always come from arid zones, from the north of Peru, south of Ecuador, and the west of the Dominican Republic. So here you see the banana zones, 8,000 hectares, a bit to the west, a bit to the south. It all depends on this Poechos Dam, the irrigation system. But they irrigate by flooding. Here you see the south part of the irrigation system with two canals, one here and one here. Altogether there are several hundreds of kilometers of canals, and it all depends on this reservoir. So, but what happens if the fungus gets into one of the canals? That's a perfect way to disseminate the fungus. So this indicates how vulnerable this Peru export production zone is. On top of that, the whole sector is highly fragmented. These are small farmers with an average of 1 hectare. They're organized in about 30 producer associations, cooperatives, about 8,000 small farmers. There are about 200 small packing stations. There are about 40 pelletizing centers or logistics centers. A lot of government organizations have to do with the sector, companies, exporters, etc. So how to organize this in a response strategy? On top of that, all those associations, they don't have compacted area where the banana plantations are located. But for example, in this area, this is a kind of schematic image. Let's say this is 100 hectare or something like that. So in 100 hectare, you have a lot of plots of 1 hectare, but they all perhaps they may be member of 4, 5, or 6 different organizations, and perhaps in this area there are about 10 or 20 packing stations. So this is very difficult how to implement biosecurity measures. Okay. Well, if we see the stages of Fusarium infection and the control measures for each stage, we can see this. So absence of race 4. So you want to exclude it. You take your measures, kind of quarantine measures. So you don't want the fungus to enter. So you take all kind of biosecurity measures on your farm. When you have the first incursion of tropical race 4, you have containment. So you want to isolate the farms that are infected, as now is happening in Colombia, for example, like Guajira. There are about 4 or 5 farms are infected, and they are hermetically closed for the public, and as a kind of it's impossible to get on that farm. So there's a kind of containment of the disease. When there's a low prevalence of tropical race 4, you can try to create healthy soils, integrated disease management. But if the concentration gets too high, it's too high, so you really have to opt for resistant varieties. So these are some elements for an agenda. So living with TR4, first of all, protect banana plantations. On the short term, strengthen biosecurity measures at national levels and at farm level. Exclusions, save times. But the challenges here are for small farmers. We now talk again about the differentiation in vulnerability of small farmers and plantations. If you want to include small farmers, they have less access to reliable information. They have no economies of scale, less financial resources for investments, all kind of measures they have to take at the farm gate. Now we'll skip the rest. So how do these biosecurity measures look like? Food baths with disinfectants at the farm gate. Also, you have to clean footwear with water under pressure. You have to fence your farm to prevent entrance of all kind of people, because remember that the human factor is the biggest factor in the dissemination of the disease, dirty boots, etc. So yeah, these farms must be closed. And nobody can enter this farm without permission anymore. You also have to take other kind of measures, wheel baths. So also the motorcycles and vehicles have to be disinfected, as you see here, disinfection of vehicles. But they were in Australia. Disinfection takes place also in Australia. At first, they spray clean water under high pressure. It's a kind of wash streets, as you see. So that's okay, but it's very expensive. So these are measures that are not accessible for small farmers, for example. Okay, another element of a possible response agenda. A resistant Cavendish banana is not yet available. But apparently this is bad of the big banana industry. But how can you imagine replanting hundreds of thousands of hectares? A renewal of banana plantation has a cost. It costs about between $8,000 and $15,000 per hectare. So is it really an option for the small farmer? And yeah, what they do then is plant with a resistant Cavendish. But yeah, the lesson of what happened now at race 1 and race 4, perhaps tomorrow another strain appears, tropical race 5, and then you have hundreds of thousands of hectares of monoculture with a lot of external inputs. So Fusarium is a soil pathogen. So yeah, perhaps a way out is promoting healthy soils. That is indeed to promote soil suppress capacity against pathogens in the soil, and also promoting biological control agents and biodiversity. So this is indeed going on. There's some measures under investigation with mixed results, rotations, cover crops, promote biodiversity in the soils, application of beneficial microorganisms, trichoderma, mycorrhiza, compost, etc. And also maintain the acidity of the soil at a neutral level, because it's also proved that a lot of nitrogen fertilization makes the soil acid and promotes Fusarium. Well, Gert already put this under attention. Why only Cavendish? So you have to diversify production system, try other varieties, and there are even varieties who are less susceptible to tropical race 4 or even tolerant or resistant. And there are hundreds of edible varieties. There's also a new technique of gene editing, but unfortunately, I would say the European market is still closed for edited bananas, because it was they said it was yet the same thing as genetic modification. So that is prohibited in the European Union. So the challenge is related with that, how to prepare the market for other banana varieties. We're all addicted to one variety, the Cavendish. And will the consumer eventually accept edited varieties? Another thing is that we have to open a dialogue with all sectors of the chain, including supermarkets, in a true multi-stakeholder approach. Will we have bananas in the future? Yes, but maybe not so cheap anymore, if you want a fair play and take all players on board. Social and environmental externalities, the whole debate about true price, must be taken into account. We do not have to pass the bill of the damage to the society in Latin American countries, or only to farmers or to future generations. So we have to include the cost in the price. So also the cost of protecting farms, cost of introducing other varieties, etc. Prevention of TR4 should be part of it. Are the supermarkets and customers willing to share these costs and pay a bit more for a banana? At this moment, it doesn't look like. So powerful discounters like Aldi and Lidl, they press for lower prices each year. They know about this. They know about COVID. They know about the measures that banana farmers have to take. They know about the measures banana farmers have to take biosecurity measures at the farm level. On top of this, European Union is restricting each year more the use of all kind of agrochemicals. And okay, that's fine. But if you want to control pests and diseases and want to bring on the market cosmetically perfect yellow banana on the market, you must control pests and diseases. And this can be done in another way, more environmental friendly, but that has a cost. But the supermarkets are not willing to pay this cost. They demand certification, demand clean production, etc. But they don't want to pay for this, unfortunately. So they know this. So how to organize, unite, and empower the banana sector? That is a huge challenge. It has to do with the future of the banana sector. So for further reading, there are some websites of Promusa, the scientific community of the banana sector. There's also a TR4 Global Network on the auspices of the World Banana Forum. That is a multi-stakeholder platform for the banana industry. And also I put here to place things in a wider perspective. A lot of interesting debates will be held in the coming years, interesting debates about the whole food system. I think the banana food system is part of it. So yeah, visit the website, follow it. You as students of international relations, something that you should be interested in. Okay, thank you very much for this space. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you for this very nice talk. I propose we do a break of 3 minutes until 9:05. Do not forget to ask your questions in the chat, and then we will be right back with you to answer all the questions you might still have about this topic.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, welcome back, everybody. Time to ask some questions. So the first thing that I was wondering, how is it that banana is such a popular crop, both to eat and to produce? Especially if you take into account that it's quite vulnerable for diseases. What makes banana so much more popular than other types of fruits, like, I don't know, pineapples or?
Okay, so Luud, you go first, or?
Yeah, what makes it popular? Yeah, yeah, it was made popular in the United States in the years 20 of the past century. Yeah, the people just yeah, they love it. Yeah, it's an excellent crop to produce in a kind of industrial way. In fact, it was one of the first crops that was really produced in a kind of industrial way. So big plantations, logistics, cooling, really as a mass product. So that was really unique. Afterwards followed, of course, by other products, but yeah, and people like it. It's very easy to peel, easy to give away, it's easy to transport. The kids love it. Yeah, I don't know. So I love bananas myself. Yeah, I speak from experience. I eat bananas almost every day. So I really like this fruit.
Yeah, so maybe I can add that indeed, as Luud says, in the 20s, there was a major marketing push from American companies. So in the 1920s, it was already widely available in the US. Whereas when I grew up as a kid, bananas were still quite kind of luxury fruit, and that was in the early 60s. So that's really a difference. And what you have to keep in mind also is that actually banana production started as a result from infrastructure projects in Central America, particularly railways.
Yeah.
There was a lot of land available, and simply said, okay, if we grow something, we have the railways here, we can transport the fruits or the produce right through those railway networks. So there was a kind of a coincidence that eventually resulted in banana as a very popular crop.
Yeah, I think it's also that it was one of the first crops where really a marketing campaign was made in the 20s and the 30s, the famous Chiquita marketing campaigns. So in spots and in posters, and so yeah, they really did everything to create a big market for this fruit. I think that was also one of the first experiences in marketing. I guess make the banana big, export banana big. But it was already big for thousands of years because it originates from Asia. But thousands of years ago, it was already eaten by many people in Africa. And during the colonial time, it was brought to Latin America, which also became a very important local staple food. It's not only export, and it's very easy to grow. You plant it, and it grows automatically. It's easy to grow.
So I have a question from Anouk. So the supermarkets are pressing for lower prices, but is there some way for us to press the supermarket to stop doing that? I mean,
buy fair trade bananas, buy fair trade bananas and organic bananas. No, what happens that Aldi, I mentioned Aldi, and I don't have any problem with that, with naming and shaming. Aldi is the biggest banana buyer in Europe, and if you know how this works, the banana market, these are generally annual contracts, and the negotiations always start in September, October, November. Negotiations with the importers, and what Aldi does, they set a kind of reference price as the biggest banana buyer in Europe. They have thousands of shops all over Europe. So the reference price of Aldi triggers also the other supermarkets. Okay, the difference cannot be that big. And it even affects the fair trade price, because the fair trade banana is a bit more expensive, an organic banana, than the conventional banana. But if they're really going to sell bananas again, dump prices, you know, this affects also the market for fair trade banana, because people come in the shop, they see the banana 99 cents, and you see the fair trade banana 180 or even €2 a kilo. They say, okay, well, this time I better buy the budget banana. You know, so it affects also the fair trade markets. But it also affects because the supermarkets, they impose these prices on the producers. So if they get away with it, and it started 2 years ago already, they did something similar, and it was really something that never hurt. So the banana producer organization of the biggest country, Ecuador, Colombia, Guatemala, and Costa Rica, they raised their voice against these practices of Aldi. And then they raised the price a bit more, I think 50 cents. And this year they do exactly the same. So they know what they are doing. It's just cynicism. And again, they raise their voice against these practices. So if you need the online magazines of fruits, fresh fruits and vegetables, there's a lot of articles about these practices of Aldi. But they think they can get away with it.
So that's a very good.
And there's almost no margins. Almost no margins left. So the margins are extremely thin.
Yeah.
Also, as Agrofair, it's all about volume. The margins of Agrofair are 1.5% of the supermarkets, 20 to 30%. And
Yes.
and the producers, they have to fire people, have to close farms, or screw the salaries of the people. You know, it's.
So I also have a question of Ilmar. So that's, I think, also for Gert Kema. How do banana look upon banana disease? Do they understand it from a biological perspective? And also, the second question they ask is, are they willing to cooperate on these fancy solutions you propose with, like, farming on substrate? You are currently muted.
Sorry, I missed the first question, Meine. What was that again?
So the first question is, how do the banana farmers look upon the banana diseases?
Okay.
Are they aware of what the problem is in, like, biological terms?
Okay, good, thanks. Yeah, so Luud very briefly also mentioned Black Sigatoka. I think I mentioned it also once. That's a foliar disease. Their banana growers know very well where they talk about, and they only can control that disease by spraying chemicals, fungicides. And as I said, for Fusarium, we don't have that option. We have done really extensive surveys and questionnaires among Philippine growers, and to our surprise, the majority of Philippine growers at that stage, that's about 4 years ago, they really don't know how to recognize Panama disease, let alone how they have to respond to the presence of the disease. So Luud also mentioned that in his talk, and I think there we disagree a little bit, to be very honest. And so there are really there's lots of evidence. Books have been written, particularly about the crisis in Gros Michel in Central America and what they did to control Panama disease. Unfortunately, or maybe also fortunately, but let's say for our memory, that's 100 years ago. And what we see is simply a repetition of things that were tried by then as well. And simply nothing worked. The only solution was Cavendish. And why was Cavendish the solution? Because it's super resistant to the race 1 strains. And that resistance still holds already for decades. That's absolutely a unique biological phenomenon. And what you have to understand here is that TR4, that's what I showed in that circular picture, TR4 is not a mutant of a race 1 strain. It's really a different species. And so TR5, as was mentioned by Luud, to be very honest, I'm not too afraid of it because, you know, we have captured global diversity of Fusarium. Of course, you don't know everything, but we know that you know, a mutation to resistant variety likely will not happen very quickly. I mean, we have the evidence in front of us. Cavendish is still resistant to race 1 strains. Of course, finding that type of resistance and incorporating that in new varieties, that takes time. And that is not really fancy. That is just plant breeding. That is occurring around us. And the Dutch are extremely good in plant breeding. You know, I mean, all those companies we have for horticultural crops, tomatoes, paprikas, cucumbers, the Dutch are definitely leading. The fancy things I'm proposing is not that fancy, to be very honest. I think you should say Cavendish is or banana production is very old-fashioned. So that's yeah, it's very conservative. And that's a kind of a mindset. I mean, let me give you one example. To control Black Sigatoka in Costa Rica, you have to spray with fungicides every 5 days. That is more than 60 times per year. If you put that in any Western European crop, every consumer would say, are you absolutely crazy? We're not going to eat this. You know, since it's far away, of course, the supermarkets do not demonstrate that in their farms, or in their shops, but they know very well, better than all of us together, that this is the common practice. So if the general consumer realizes that we only can bananas because of the immense input in fungicides, you know, there will be kind of a revolt, you know, and say, you know, are you crazy? This is just not a way to do it. But as Luud also said, everything is driven by price. So there are plenty of studies. If you would say, okay, you know, I have a super healthy banana, it is really produced in the best possible way, very good for the growers, but unfortunately it is 25 cents more expensive per kilogram than the regular bananas. I assure you that the main consumers, the majority of the consumers will go for the cheapest bananas. That's how it works. And that's unfortunate, but that's reality. But I mean, it really takes, in a way, it also takes courage to say, you know what? We grow bananas already 100 years the way we do it right now. This has to be innovative. If you look to all those other crops, it's possible. We just give it a go. And you always start with a few forerunners, maybe with a niche. And eventually, and that's exactly how it went with Cavendish, eventually many growers will realize, or many companies will realize, hey, this is actually a very interesting alternative. So we're not sure yet. That's why you have to test it. So you have to look at all the economic parameters, etc. But that's what we currently do.
Okay, thank you very much. I also have a question from Ella, who is very curious about why your company cannot sell their bananas in the Dutch supermarkets. You mentioned something along those lines in your introduction.
Yeah, because we lose the tenders from our biggest competitors on the fair trade market. Well, Agrofert started with fair trade. Perhaps you recall a bit the history when Solidariat, the NGO, which was also at the front runner in the fair trade coffee, they started talking with the big coffee companies, and they accepted, okay, to have a fair trade label on the coffee. Then they say, okay, now we go to the next commodity, bananas. So they also started talking with the big banana companies, but they say, okay, no, we don't want that. Go and play elsewhere, it's nothing for us. So that is why Solidariat to say, okay, we're going to challenge you, we're going to do it ourselves. So that's why Agrofert funded the company, Agrofert. And yeah, we started with a few containers a week. But nowadays, it's about 35,000 containers per year in fair trade. And Agrofert lost its majority. So the biggest fair trade traders at this moment is Fives and Dole. And yeah, since they have, they're far bigger. And what they often do is offer, when these tenders go on each year, they offer a kind of package. So they say, okay, we offer you fair trade and organic and conventional banana for this price. And since Agrifert is mainly a fair trade company, we cannot make that kind of deal. So why are we not in the shops in the Netherlands? Because we always lose the tenders from Dole and from Fives to the Jumbo and to the Plus and I don't know what. Yeah.
So people still go for the cheapest banana.
Yeah, because they offer a fair trade banana at a cheaper price.
Yeah.
That's the story.
So I also had another question. So the process of this disease coming from Southeast Asia to Africa and then to is something that you could probably see coming for quite a while. How come that the countries in Middle and South America, that some of which are very dependent on the trade of bananas, were not already like working on preparing? I mean, you said that the information is very sparse.
Well, I mean, they were preparing themselves.
Yes.
With several organizations have organized courses how to deal with it, etc., etc. But the proof is in the pudding, right? So once it arrives, then you see that there are a lot of words, but in reality, they were not at all prepared.
Okay.
So I mean, we sometimes had to really, and I don't mean it. Don't take me wrong, but we really had to teach them, and sometimes on truly basic techniques on running diagnostics, etc. And of course, there is also a cultural aspect. So it really takes an effort to have a smooth collaboration. There is dignity, there is pride. I mean, sometimes it's not easy to say, "Well, I'm sorry, we just don't know what to do," right? So this is another thing where I think I disagree with Luud, or at least I would like to give a little different perspective, and that is, so prevention is of course the first. Everybody tries to prevent it. In reality, we see that it's very difficult to prevent. The facts are on the table. Mozambique, out of the blue, it arrived. Why? Sheer ignorance. People just did not pay attention, period. Colombia, same story. We don't know exactly how it went there, but we are for sure it went there by people. The second phase is, in my opinion, is not quarantine it. The second phase is eradicate it. Do as much as you can to eradicate it, really. Open up special legislation, use the strongest chemicals to try to eradicate it, just at that particular spot. Because then you secure that you will not have secondary dissemination. I mean, look to the storms that are now in Central America. The flooding there is devastating, really devastating in Honduras. I'm truly happy that TR4 is not yet there. Otherwise, it would be a sheer drama. And of course you can say, okay, we contained it in Guajira. Guajira is on the seaside. It's the Mexican Gulf. Do you know how many typhoons are there? You only need one that hits Colombia, and you're just going nuts. I mean, it is very, very. You cannot control the weather. So I think it's very optimistic to say, we can contain it. I haven't seen a single country where they have been successful in containing the disease. That's just a pipe dream. I'm sorry to say, that's just not happening. And so, of course, we have to do everything to slow down an epidemic and to be super careful, etc., etc. But what you see in Colombia happening, they make of this site where TR4 landed, they make it a trial site. That is totally perpendicular, in my opinion. I'm very sorry. Mm-hmm. If you make it a trial site, you essentially start to play around with TR4. That's something you shouldn't do. It's not a toy. You have to kill it, period. So, there is still a huge gap in a knowledge gap, really, with smallholders, and Luud and I completely agree there, disseminating know-how, getting this information to smallholders in language that is understandable is really a huge challenge. That's number one. But once it's there to really control it, that's it is very, very difficult.
Yeah, I agree with you, Gert. It's really in Latin American context is a challenge. Even the best practices in this regard is in Australia, and even there, you see new cases, they slow down the spreading. It's slowing down the spreading. That's what it is, basically.
Yeah.
But even in Australia, a developed country, they pump millions in surveillance, in they're buying farms, they destroy them, they infected farms. But even there, the disease is spreading also at a low pace, but it is spreading. Yeah.
Okay, then I think I'm going to thank you both very much for your time, your nice talks.
You're welcome.
I have two small announcements to make. One is, don't forget to leave your feedback on the talk. The link can be found in the description. Next week we will be back with a career night with SIP, with old SIP members. That's our two.
Okay, good. It was a pleasure. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
You're welcome. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.